As the sun goes down, there are animals that are just beginning to wake up. We'll dive deep into these amazing creatures, and of course, I'll need to sketch them.
I've heard somebody once describe them as they're more like little flying bears because, they hibernate,
Yeah.
they live a really long time, they don't have very many pups. It's quite fascinating.
The fly bears. This is my brother, Kyle Nelson.
This is bat ecologist is what I call myself, but the broader science of bats is called chiropterology. The chiro part is the Latin for hand, and so chiroptera is hand wing. Because if you look at like a diagram of their wing, it has all the like finger joints and stuff, and like their little claw is actually the thumb.
One of the coolest things about bats is that they are a mammal that flies.
They are the only mammal capable of true flight.
Which I think is pretty darn cool. What do you do for your job?
Now I do a lot of acoustic work with bats, so we put out microphones out into the landscape and we record them as they fly by and as they're feeding in the environment, and from those calls I can identify what species I'm picking up.
What does a bat sound like?
Bats are echolocating at frequencies that we can't hear, especially the ones in Canada. Their frequencies are too high, they're in the ultrasonic range.
Why should we care about bats?
Flight is extremely energetically costly, and so to fuel that flight they have to eat a ton of insects. So they're actually, even though they're really small, they're these amazing predators on the landscape. A pregnant female little brown bat can eat its entire body weight in insects in a night. So they eat a lot of pests, both agricultural pests, mosquitoes.
How long do bats live?
So there's been some research where they've put bans on bats and they've recovered them 30, 40 years. So bats are facing a number of different threats. One of the really pressing ones in North America is white nose syndrome, which is this fungal disease. It's been pretty rapidly spreading across the continent. It irritates the bat's skin. It's waking them up throughout the winter. And so what that essentially does is it wears down their fat reserves and destroys their ability to survive the winter.
I didn't even really know that bats hibernated. So how long do they hibernate for?
Not all bats hibernate. Some of them migrate and manage to get around that. For the migratory bats, their threat is wind energy, actually, because they were quite often running into wind turbines on their migratory routes.
Are you kind of studying where they migrate?
Migration was a part of my master's, and now I'm more studying white nose impacts. Part of my work is supporting a researcher who's developing a vaccine for white nose syndrome. So that's pretty exciting.
Is that going well?
So far, it looks promising, yeah. Insects are declining all over the world. That's their food that's disappearing, and that's a huge concern for not just bats, but birds and all sorts of insectivores.
Common misconceptions about bats.
People perceiving them as if they're just flying mice, but they actually have very different life histories from rodents. They reproduce at quite a low rate, so instead of having like a litter of pups, they actually only have one, in some areas 2 pups per year. So that means
how long do they stay with those pups?
In North America, bats, they give birth kind of late June-ish or so. The mom stays with the pup in the roost for that time, going out and feeding, coming back and feeding them. Usually around mid-July, late July, the pups become volant, and that means they're flying around and starting to learn their own way.
I know that rats have been kind of persecuted.
You mean bats?
Bats, right? People kind of get creeped out by them thinking they're going to get rabies, but what's the chances of that?
Rabies is present in the population, but it's actually quite a low prevalence.
If we come across bats, are they our friends, or what should we be doing with bats when we find them in nature?
I certainly consider them a friend. I don't know if they consider me a friend sometimes when I'm, catching them. People who don't have their rabies vaccinations shouldn't handle them. I mean, they're a wild animal. No one should really be handling wild animals if they can avoid it. If someone finds a bat and they need to remove it from a house or something, it's quite often they can contact their local wildlife professionals to deal with it.
So what kind of bats do we have here on Vancouver Island?
Bats are the second most speciose order of mammals behind rodents, and so there's over 1,300 species of bats in the world.
Okay.
And they're on every continent except Antarctica. And on Vancouver Island, we're lucky enough to have 9 species of bats. And then some might be coming and going, but 9 species are confirmed here.
And so what's kind of like the general aspect of these 9 species that are here on the island then?
The largest bat that we have on the island is hoary bat, which is a migratory bat. Pretty big. They're kind of like that big if you were to stretch them out.
Yeah. Open up their wings.
Yeah. They don't really like that. And then the smallest bat on Vancouver Island, that's probably the California myotis, which we catch a lot in the Gulf Islands, and they're more like that big.
So they all kind of the same color?
North America's bats vary a little bit. A lot of them are brown. I mean, everyone always says, "Oh, this is a bat. It's a little brown bat," but there's many brown
Many
bats
types
that are
of brown
small.
bat.
There's only one species that's called little brown bat. And then the hoary bats are kind of interesting. They've got like the late 1990s style frosted tips.
Okay.
And some people call them skylines because they have a bit of a mane. Silver-haired bats that I did my master's on also have a bit of a frosted tip look to them too, and they're more of a blackish color.
Kind of like they're like playing for NSYNC or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Where are they typically migrating?
Some species are especially migratory, like the hoary bats, the silver-haired bats, the red bats. My master's actually focused on the migration patterns of silver-haired bats, in which I was trying to see whether bats were going north to south or east to west in British Columbia and sort of the Pacific Northwest area.
Did you figure it out?
The research that I did found evidence that rather than doing this sort of traditional north to south migration that we think of with most animals, that they were actually taking more of a shortcut going out to the west coast for the winters, where, you know, we have these mild climates, these nice warm
beautiful spots.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Coming to these areas where we still sometimes have insects active in the winter, and so they might be able to just come out here, have some food, and wait until the summer comes around to head back into the interior.
So are those bats then still hibernating, like the ones that are going to come out to these milder places?
They can go into torpor, but it's not like hibernating in a cave style way most of the time. You think of with like the more traditional like little brown bats.
Yeah.
That you'll see in these big colonies and big caves.
You moved to the States for bats,
Yes,
yeah?
So I work for the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, and specifically to study bats, and so we do a lot of population monitoring. I do a lot of acoustic work, so I'll put out detectors on the landscape, record the bats, take those back into the office, and I can look at the calls. I don't actually listen to the calls, but I look at the calls on a screen, and from that I can usually identify them to species. We're doing a vaccine trial, or supporting another study that's doing a vaccine trial for white nose syndrome, so there we have a bat roost in which we're actually monitoring whether bats are returning to that roost over year.
And how's that going?
So far, it's looking promising. I mean, it's where I'm working right now is kind of where the wave of white nose syndrome is coming across the continent. So it's just kind of hitting them now, and so we'll see how things are going in the next few years. And then another research project I work on, we're trying to attract bats back to the roost. So we catch them with these big mist nets, extract them out of the mist nets, and we put this temporary glue on them that attaches these radio transmitters. And so then we're going out with antennas and we're detecting them back to where they're roosting to try and figure out where their homes are.
When you said that you could detect different species by their calls, what are you looking at?
Shape of the call that indicates it. One of the key things is just what frequencies they're working at. It usually tends to be related to body size. So smaller bats are higher frequency,
okay.
Bigger bats, lower frequency.
What can people do to help bats or encourage bats to move into their own neighborhoods?
If they have existing habitat for bats, of course you want to try and protect that. You can create habitat by potentially putting up a bat box in a nice warm area. They like it to be pretty warm in the roosts during the summer. Most of our bats in North America, and especially the bats in Canada, are insectivores. They want to eat bugs. So trying to create insect-friendly habitat, or also just like choosing organic foods, because bats, rather than putting a bunch of pesticides onto our farmland, why don't we use bats instead to control those insects?
What is a mist net?
A mist net is also used in catching birds. The mesh is composed of like this fishing line material, and so it's really, you can barely see them when they're in front of your face. And so bats, even though they have this amazing echolocation ability, they will sometimes, especially the young ones, will blunder into the nets. And so we very quickly extract them from the nets and measurements and identify them, do whatever we need to do.
Is it so fine that their echolocation can't bounce off these nets?
Yeah. I mean, we have to be pretty tricky about it because they're so good at figuring this out. So we quite often have to kind of hide them around corners that we think bats are going to be going around, or we put them directly over water where we think the bats are going to be coming down to drink or feed, because their echolocation ability is amazing, and so it's quite possible that they'll see it. And like I've seen it where people have set up infrared cameras and we can watch how the bats are interacting with the nets, and you'll see them going, and then whoop, right over the
so
net.
they know
and
it's there.
Quite frustrating.
I saw a bat swimming once. It was like doing the breaststroke, and then it climbed up like a dead tree.
They're not just going out and doing laps. It's not something they choose to have happen, but they are amazingly strong swimmers. I've seen it before too, where I've seen a bat in the water and somebody was following it in waders in the water, and the bat was getting away from them because it was just going.
They're pretty good at the breaststroke.
But it's very hard for them. Like, they can't break the surface tension with the water usually, so they have to go to land, climb up a tree or something. Because it's also, most bat species, it's quite hard for them to take off from the ground.
Okay.
They need to kind of drop down. Normally, they'll drink water on the fly. Like, they just kind of skim the water like they're a water bomber.
So maybe he was trying that?
Possibly. I mean, it could have been a juvenile bat that just hadn't quite figured out what it was supposed to be doing.
So what do you find is the most interesting thing about bats?
I think I was naturally drawn to sort of the underdog story of bats and the fact that there's there's a decent amount of prejudice against them. It's also a really interesting field to get into because I kind of feel like the field of study in bats is a little behind everything else because they're, what we call a very cryptic animal. Like, they're very hard to study, so it took a long time for us to actually start studying them. It's usually related to all these conservation threats that suddenly everyone realized, we really need to figure out what's going on with bats. A wide field that I could study various things in, so that was pretty exciting. And they're just they have such an interesting life history. Like, they're not these little flying mice as
right.
some
As
people perceive
think.
them as, and many different foreign languages, actually their word for them somehow includes mouse in it. So there's a lot of organizations that you can volunteer for that are doing various bat work. Like, they'll do roost counts. They'll go to known bat boxes or known bat condominiums, which is actually a thing.
Bat condos.
Yeah, bat condos is a thing.
I hope the rent's not too expensive.
You can do emergence counts, and so you sit out there with other people, other bat enthusiasts, and you're counting the bats coming out, and that's a way of monitoring populations that any community member can do, and you don't need special vaccinations or anything like that to do that.
Oh, that brings me to another question. If I just want to see bats, if I want to have the opportunity to see bats, when is the best time of day and where should I hang out?
Pretty much right about the same time that we're at right now, which is just as sun setting. This is when they'd start to emerge, maybe another 15 minutes or so, and you'd probably see bats starting to come out over the water to feed on insects that are flying around.
So near waters also.
Near water is a great thing, yeah, especially if you go out on a lake at around this time of night. You'll quite often see a lot of bats, skimming the surface and flying around, and yeah, that's your kind of last chance before it gets too dark and you can't see them against the sky anymore.
Right, yeah. Because sometimes I might think that I'm seeing a bird, but actually I'm seeing a bat. Because swallows and bats, they kind of seem to hang out in the similar places, right?
I call swallows daytime bats.
Daytime
because
bats, yeah.
They're eating very similar foods, they're behaving in a very similar way, and usually are occupying similar habitat.
So when it comes to, because when I think about a swallow and I think about the acrobatics of a swallow as it's hunting, is a bat hunting in a really similar way to that?
Pretty much, although I would almost say bats are more maneuverable. They can pull pretty tight corners, but maybe can't fly as fast, especially some of the smaller bats. And I mean, some bats, like the nectar-feeding bats that you find further south, they're able to hover.
Okay, so like a little helicopter, a little bat helicopter.
Like a hummingbird, yeah.
Okay, more like a hummingbird. Okay, that's interesting. Can you give me a fun fact about bats?
For those people that enjoy imbibing on tequila, so the nectar-feeding bats that I was just talking about, they actually will pollinate agave, of course, of tequila. So if you enjoy tequila, you have bats to thank for that.
So we would consider bats to be a pollinator.
Some bats are, yes.
Some
bats. These nectar-feeding bats.
What about fruit-eating bats? We don't have those on the island.
No, we don't have any fruit-eating bats in Canada.
But fruit-eating bats, where would we find them?
More in the tropical areas where I'm getting distracted by things flying overhead, but it's just a bird.
It's just a bird. He's always on the lookout for bats.
Fruit here is more seasonal. It wouldn't be a very reliable source of nutrition.
And then I guess those bats would actually be helping then seed areas, right?
Yes.
Because they'd be moving seed around.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay.
None of the Canadian bats are pollinators, but it's found in parts of the southern United States and.
So our Canadian bats are more they're after bugs.
They're after bugs. They're insectivores. It's a much more reliable food source in Canada.
What would you hope would happen for bats?
I hope that bats start to recover from white nose syndrome that we've talked about. I hope that wind energy companies, there are ways that they can mitigate their impacts on bats, so I hope that gets adopted more broadly to protect the migratory bats. Yeah, I just want their populations to thrive and carry on because they play a really important role in the ecosystem, both for humans and the broader nature.
Where would they learn about bats and how?
In British Columbia, we have the BC Community Bat Program, and so that's there's various regional organizations and people that have taken the lead on organizing these roost emergence counts and things like that. Here on southern Vancouver Island, we have the Habitat Acquisition Trust, and they've taken the lead on education and outreach when it comes to bats in this area.
Do you have a favorite bat book?
One of the more interesting books I've read is The Secret Life of Bats by Merlin Tuttle. He's kind of like one of the earlier bat biologists who was, doing it before it became cool. His book is just writing about him kind of fighting against the stigma. This was him working in the 60s and 70s on his PhD and trying to teach people about bats and getting over the fear that everyone had of them and just figuring out how to do a science that no one had really done that much before.
Kyle got me reading this book, and it's really good because it's quite anecdotal. It wasn't super technical sciencey. Yeah. Thank you for watching this video. You can let us know if you have any questions about bats in the comments.